Okay, we're just doing this to quickly try and make a point, or 10 or 20 if we remember all the points. So we have all the people in the world, but we're only going to draw a Venn diagram of the 1 to 3% who are said to have DID. There's our circle. Frank, help me out. Okay, so that's the 1 to 3% DID. Within this 1 to 3%, we have, I want to think through the logic of what I'm doing here. Okay, so this is my Venn diagram, so, and we also have like plural people, which would be a bigger circle than this, but we don't know how many percent they are, so I won't put them. But what I will do is I will draw a circle to represent the Vennness of the people who overlap this circle, but also are plurals outside of the circle, so they don't qualify for DID. So this is the people in therapy. Now, notably, these are plural people in therapy. Now, notably, not all of them are in therapy for DID. Not all of them have been diagnosed yet for DID. So we will have a smaller cohort, since the DID people take 6 to 8 years to get a proper diagnosis. Obviously, they have to be in therapy for the 6 to 8 years without that diagnosis. So let's say half. Okay. We'll say in here, no DX. That's awful, isn't it? Let me try that again. No DX. Okay, so let's make this bigger. Ooh, okay. So we have all the plurals in therapy, then we have all the DID people who have not yet received a DID DX. Right? Now, the point of this is, and we're going to assume, okay, well, I'm going to just say, let's not assume. Let's say that some of the, can I make a smaller dot? There we go. Maybe not that small. There we go. Okay. I'm going to say an aside of therapists make mistakes, so some of those plural people are going to end up with a DID DX, even if they really shouldn't have one. But, okay, so you got therapists. You got all the DID studies that are done, and all of those studies are pulling from people who are in therapy, who have gotten their DID DX, and are with, let's say, trusted therapists. So of these therapists that are doing therapy, remember, 90% of them don't know their ass from their elbow when it comes to DID. That's according to the Harvard statistic that 90% are unqualified to diagnose and treat DID. So of the therapists, there's a small, and I don't have an exact percent, but there is a very small cohort, let's make this bigger, a small cohort that are used for the studies. So these are, let's say, participants. Okay, so we'll back out of this, but these are the participants in the studies, the research papers, etc. on DID. And one of the things we know is that the majority of the time, this cohort is about 36 to 40 bodies in the study. I'm going to say people, but it's 36 to 40 bodies, systems, whatever you want to call it, are actual participants in the studies on DID. So we're going to back out again. Okay. So here is the 1 to 3% of people with DID. Okay, and we're going to talk just a teeny bit about who these people probably are. Okay, they maybe they're too poor, or they're uninsured or underinsured. And I don't know percentages on these, but this Venn diagram is true, okay? There are people definitely not insured. There are people who have been hurt in therapy, so they're therapy trauma. So they refuse to go to therapy. They're not insured. They're in a country that doesn't even believe in DID. That would probably be some portion of the people in therapy. They have DID, but they'll never get the diagnosis. So they're in that circle with therapy already. So they're the ones that are never going to get a DID diagnosis because, for whatever reason, they're with a decent therapist, but the therapist doesn't know how to diagnose or spot DID. They will never get DID diagnosis because they're in a country that doesn't believe in it. Then there's the people that for the moment are subclinical. For now. For now. So they are not presenting any symptoms that require them to run to a therapist right now, or they're just dealing with it the best they can. Whatever reasons, they're subclinical for the moment. Maybe too young, to get a proper diagnosis or to see a therapist or to seek out a therapist because they're underage and so on. And they're reliant on their caregivers to do it or bring them to a therapist. Or then there's the people who are still in abuse situations, still abused. So then in those cases, because of power and control issues, their abusers may be keeping them from therapy because they're afraid of being found out. So there's the still abused. There's the not insured. There's the insured people who, for other logistical reasons, can't get to therapy. They're working too much. They don't have the privilege of taking the time off. So underprivileged. So they can't take advantage of the therapy even though they have the insurance or the coverage or the money, or barely the money. But they can't afford to take time off of work because then because like once a week, an hour a week plus travel time and so on. Oh, travel time, right. No access. All right, so we've got people with no access. They live in a therapy desert, or just the one therapist in town is one of those people that's not good, or they don't trust, or everybody in town would know they're going. Whatever it is, they have no access to a therapist. Let's see. Well, whatever it is. Okay, so the main point is that tiny dot of who is actually being studied. So all of the papers and the research that come out, they're not only like in that tiny dot, but they're being seen by therapists who the researchers like. So it's not a random sample of all people with DID. It's a random sample of the people who do not have all these other issues, who are in therapy with the right therapists. So a therapist that the study people trust to actually say, yes, this person does have DID. So it's not one of the 90% of therapists, it's one of the 10% of therapists. So they're with one of the 10% that are trusted to know what they're doing. Usually the study researcher people's friends or colleagues. They are hand-picked, not randomly picked, from the therapist in question's clients. So usually they're hand-picked and submitted to the study. So it is non-random at all. It's definitely biased sample. like biased on so many levels. It's biased by who the therapist is that they're working with. It's biased by that therapist's opinion. It's biased by they've already been through the 6 to 8 years of being misdiagnosed. It's biased by them having access and insurance or ways of paying for therapy, of them not living in a therapy desert. It's people who are no longer or not likely to be still under the power and control of their abusers. People who have a clinical presentation rather than subclinical, and are not ruined for therapy by former therapy trauma, and so on. So I just wanted to show like how biased, how like off in a corner of the Venn diagram the cohort is. And it is possible that that cohort, that tiny little dot, actually crosses the line into plurals and people who may or may be in that gray area of whether or not they should be considered DID any longer. Maybe they no longer have as much distress and so on. Like, I'm not saying like the DID portion belongs under the big umbrella of plural, so everything outside the DID circle could be plural, but the dot could be over that line. I just didn't want to put it there because I don't have any stats. I'm like trying, I'm trying to kind of make it like somewhat accurate, but I don't really know the stats like of how many of the 1 to 3% of DID is in therapy versus how many in the therapy have a DX versus no DX and so on. Like the sizes of some of these circles might be different. Maybe people with no access in therapy deserts is a larger portion or a smaller portion, but it excludes all these experiences. So the people who are in those studies have already had that 6 to 8 years. They've gotten a diagnosis. They're seeing somebody decent already. They've been in therapy who knows how long. That's another thing. Like long enough for that therapist to be certain that they have DID to submit them to the study. So there's a certain amount of time they've already been in therapy. So the people we're studying are a small cloistered group and not random sample of the general population of DID people. And that biases the studies. And that's my rant. That's my 12.5-minute rant. Thank you for joining me. We are the Chris's. And thank you for joining us. We can't even sign our own name decently, right? Bye.